On my 21st birthday, I stood in front of the man who raised me, hoping he'd at least remember what day it was. He did. But instead of a gift, my father slid an envelope across the table and said, "Sign it, Amina. After today, you're no longer my daughter." My vision blurred. Not from tears, but from the way he looked at me. Like I was a mistake he was finally correcting. I had no idea that months later, that same man would sit in a boardroom, watching the CEO call my name, while his world collapsed in front of him. He disowned the wrong daughter. Amina walked down the stairs with a small hope in her heart. It was her 21st birthday, and even though her father had grown cold over the years, she still wished he would at least say the words. She stood in front of him, waiting for some sign that he remembered. Instead, he slid a thick envelope across the table without looking up. She opened it slowly, confused, and her hands began to shake when she saw the official stamps. They weren't birthday papers. They were disownment papers. Her father didn't blink, didn't pause, didn't show a single emotion. He only tapped the line where her signature was supposed to go and said, "No arguments. Sign." His voice was flat, steady, as if he had rehearsed it, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Amina stared at him, trying to understand how a parent could do this so easily. She had done everything he ever asked. She studied hard. She stayed out of trouble. She tried to earn even the smallest piece of his approval. But today he looked at her like she was a problem he wanted to erase. She tried to speak, to ask why, to remind him it was her birthday. But the words stuck in her throat. Her chest felt tight. She searched his face for a hint of hesitation, something that would show he cared. But there was nothing. He had already decided. He wanted her out of his life completely. The silence felt heavier than the papers in her hand. Amina felt a sharp, hollow pain spreading through her chest, the kind that comes when someone you love shows you how little you matter to them. She slowly pushed the papers back toward him, hoping he would reconsider, hoping he would at least look at her. But he didn't. He simply pushed them back harder. In that moment she realized he wasn't angry, he wasn't hurt. He was done with her. She stood there for a few seconds, wishing someone would walk in and stop this, wishing it was a misunderstanding. But all she heard was her father's calm breathing and the quiet rustle of the papers. A birthday that should have brought love brought rejection instead. Amina finally stepped back, feeling something inside her fall apart. She didn't cry. She just turned away slowly, knowing that whatever she had believed about family was no longer true. The girl who wanted a simple happy birthday walked away with nothing but heartbreak. That night, Amina lay awake in the small corner of her room, still trying to understand why her own father wanted her gone. The house was dark and quiet, but her mind refused to rest. She kept replaying his cold eyes, the papers, the way he didn't even hesitate. She hugged her knees and tried to convince herself there had to be a reason. Maybe stress, maybe pressure, maybe something she didn't know. A father doesn't just throw his child away for nothing, right? Around midnight, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Her father's voice followed, low at first, then louder as he entered his study. She thought he was alone, but then she heard him make a phone call. She wasn't trying to spy, but the door was slightly open, and his voice carried through the quiet house. She stood still, not breathing, when she heard him laugh, a deep, satisfied laugh she had never heard before. "With her out of the picture, everything goes to me," he said proudly. "No more sharing. No more obligations. It's all mine now." Amina felt the air leave her lungs. She pressed a hand against her mouth as her heart dropped. So this wasn't about disappointment. It wasn't about anything she did. It was about money. He was removing her so he could have full control of everything. Property, accounts, inheritance, all of it. She had been nothing but an obstacle to him. Her father continued talking, bragging about how easy it was. "She won't fight. She doesn't even have the courage," he said, almost mocking her. "Once she signs, I'm free." Amina's eyes stung, but not from sadness this time. It was something deeper, something sharp, like betrayal cutting through her chest. She had always thought she wasn't enough for him. She blamed herself for every cold look, every harsh word. She tried harder, thinking she could earn love. But now she understood the truth. He never wanted her to succeed, because her success meant he had to share. She stepped back slowly, her legs trembling. She felt like the walls around her were closing in. All this time she thought she was the problem, when he was the one planning behind her back. He had waited for her birthday not to celebrate, but to remove her neatly from his life. Not because she failed him, but because greed ruled him. Amina went back to her room quietly, her heart heavy but her mind suddenly clear. The man she called father didn't care about her future or her pain. He cared about what he could gain without her. And that night, she realized something she had never dared to think before. She wasn't losing him. He had already lost her. Amina left her father's house with only a small bag and the clothes she was wearing. The night felt colder than usual, and every step she took away from the place she once called home felt heavier. She didn't know where else to go, but her feet carried her toward the one person who had never treated her like a burden, her Aunt Karen. The walk was long, and her eyes kept filling with tears she refused to let fall. She kept hearing her father's words, his laughter, his plan to erase her for money. By the time she reached Karen's building, her heart felt empty. She stood outside the small apartment door, unsure if she should knock. She didn't want to disturb anyone or show how broken she felt. But before her hand even touched the door, it opened. Karen stood there, her eyes soft but alert, as if she had been waiting. Without asking a single question, she reached forward and pulled Amina into a warm, tight hug. It was the first time in hours that Amina felt her body stop shaking. Karen guided her inside gently, like she could feel every piece of pain Amina was carrying. The apartment was tiny, just one bedroom, a little couch, and a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people. But it instantly felt safer than the mansion she had just left. Amina sat down slowly, and when she finally tried to speak, her voice cracked. Before she could explain anything, Karen placed a hand over hers and said softly, "You are not disposable, Amina." The words hit deeper than any hug. They filled the empty space inside her chest, reminding her she mattered to someone. Amina closed her eyes, breathing in the comfort she had been missing for years. Karen continued, her voice calm but firm. "But some people will only learn your value when they lose you. And trust me, they will." For the first time since that painful morning, Amina felt the smallest spark of strength return. Karen listened patiently as Amina told her everything. Her father's coldness, the papers, the phone call, the betrayal. Karen didn't interrupt. She didn't try to fix it with quick advice. She simply hugged her tighter and said, "Good. Let him think he won. Now it's your turn to rise." Later that night, she encouraged Amina to apply for the graduate program at Amina Global, a place known for taking in talented young people and shaping leaders. Amina hesitated, unsure if she was good enough, but Karen smiled and said, "You are more capable than you realize. Let this be your start, not your ending." For the first time in a long while, Amina felt a new kind of hope, not the fragile kind she had with her father, but a strong, growing one, born from someone who believed in her without conditions. Amina woke up early on the day of the interview, her stomach tight with nerves. She didn't have new clothes or fancy shoes. She wore an old blouse she had ironed 3 times and a pair of heels borrowed from her aunt that were slightly too big. But she kept reminding herself that she had nothing left to lose. This interview at Amina Global was her one chance to build a future that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. When she walked into the tall building, she felt small among the confident, well-dressed candidates waiting in the lobby. Some glanced at her worn outfit and looked away, assuming she didn't stand a chance. Amina swallowed her fear and held her documents tightly, telling herself she deserved to be there just as much as anyone. Inside the interview room, 3 panelists sat with straight faces, flipping through her file. One of them raised an eyebrow at her limited experience. Another asked sharp questions meant to test her confidence. Her hands trembled slightly, but she answered each question honestly. Still, she could tell they weren't impressed. Halfway through, they handed her a project file and asked her to analyze the financial projections. It was the kind of task most candidates struggled with. Amina took the papers, reading them carefully. At first, everything looked normal, but she soon spotted something strange. Numbers that didn't match, missing risk indicators, and growth percentages that were too high to be realistic. She checked again just to be sure. When she finally looked up, one of the panelists frowned. "Is something wrong?" he asked. Amina took a breath. "There's an error in the projections," she said softly. She explained each detail, pointing out the flawed data and the consequences it could cause for the company. The room went silent. The panelists stared, At her surprised, this was a mistake even their senior team hadn't caught in months. The lead examiner leaned forward, suddenly interested. "Who taught you this?" he asked, expecting her to mention some expensive school or private tutor. Amina lowered her eyes for a moment before answering quietly. "Survival teaches you more than any classroom." Her words hung in the air. The panelists exchanged glances, their expressions shifting. The girl they thought would fail had just spotted a problem professionals had overlooked. The interview, which had started with doubt, ended with respect. When Amina walked out of the room, her steps were still shaky, but now, they carried a spark of confidence she had never felt before. Amina spent the rest of the day checking her email again and again, her heart jumping every time her phone vibrated. She didn't expect much. She had seen the other candidates, confident, polished, well-connected. She kept telling herself that even if she failed, at least she had tried. By evening, she sat on the small couch in her aunt's apartment, staring at the ceiling, trying to calm her thoughts. Her aunt kept reassuring her, but Amina's mind was full of doubts. What if they thought she was too inexperienced? What if her clothes made a bad impression? What if catching the error wasn't enough? Then her phone buzzed once more. This time, the notification was an email from Amina Global. Her hands froze. She opened it slowly, afraid of what she might read. But the first line made her gasp softly. "Congratulations. You have been selected." She blinked hard, reading the sentence again to be sure it was real. She pressed the phone to her chest, unable to stop the smile spreading across her face. For the first time in a long while, she felt something warm in her heart, pride. Pure pride. But another email arrived seconds later, and this one made her breath catch even more. It was from the CEO herself, Madame Isok, a name everyone respected, a leader, known for spotting raw talent. Amina opened the message with shaking fingers. Madame Isok had personally reviewed her interview performance. She was impressed by how Amina found the projection error, something even their senior analysts had overlooked. Instead of placing Amina in the normal training program, she invited her to join the strategy unit, one of the most advanced, highly selective departments in the entire company. Amina had to reread the email 3 times. The strategy unit was where major decisions were made, where only the best minds in the company worked. People fought for years to earn a spot there. And Madame Isok wanted her. Her aunt hugged her tightly, repeating how proud she was. But Amina could barely speak. She kept thinking of her father's words, how he said she wasn't worth anything, how he erased her so he could gain more. And now here she was, chosen by a CEO who saw value in her immediately. The next morning, she met Madame Isok for the first time. The woman looked at her with calm, confident eyes and said, "You belong here, Amina." Those 4 words felt like someone rebuilding all the broken pieces inside her. It was the first time anyone had ever looked at her that way, with belief, respect, and trust. That moment became the beginning of a new life Amina never thought she could have. While Amina was building her new life quietly, far away from her father's shadow, Neo's world was beginning to fall apart. The empire he had spent years bragging about was slowly cracking from the inside. It started with small problems, delayed payments, late shipments, confused reports. He ignored them at first, believing everything would sort itself out. But things only got worse. Investors who once trusted him began pulling out one by one. They no longer believed his promises or his confident speeches. They complained about mismanagement, weak planning, and numbers that never made sense. Neo tried to calm them, but his voice no longer carried the same power it used to. His company's reputation was slipping fast, and everyone around him could see it. The real blow came when he tried to secure the biggest contract of his career. It was the deal that was supposed to save everything. If he won it, his company would survive. If he didn't, everything he owned would crumble. Neo pushed his team hard, demanding perfect results, but the problem was deeper than effort. The project was built on incorrect data, poorly calculated projections, and unrealistic timelines. The same type of mistakes Amina had caught during her interview at Amina Global. Mistakes Neo's own analysts failed to notice for months. When the reviewing committee went through the files, they immediately flagged the errors. The client grew frustrated and threatened to cancel the partnership entirely. Neo panicked. For the first time he felt fear he couldn't hide. His staff tried to fix things, but they were already too late. The contract was slipping away. In desperation, he looked for outside help. He searched through the list of top consulting firms, hoping to find someone powerful enough to rescue him. There was only one company with the skills, the influence, and the team capable of repairing such a damaged proposal. Amina Global. Neo hesitated when he saw the name. He remembered how Amina once talked about applying there. He brushed it off then, thinking she could never make it into such a respected company. But now he had no choice. His business was collapsing like a tower built on weak foundations. His only hope was the very company his daughter now belonged to, though he had no idea she was rising so quickly inside it. While Neo was drowning in crisis, Amina was growing stronger every day. She worked late, learned fast, and earned respect quietly. Two different worlds were moving toward a collision, and Neo didn't even see it coming. Through all his struggles, he never imagined that the only person who could help him stand again was the same daughter he had thrown away without a second thought. Neo sat alone in his office, drowning in paperwork and stress. His desk, once filled with organized plans and confident decisions, was now covered in urgent notices, canceled deals, and warning letters from investors. Every morning felt heavier than the one before. But he kept telling himself that once Amina Global reviewed his case, things would finally turn around. He waited anxiously for their response, hoping they would assign a strong team to fix the mess his company had become. Late in the afternoon, a new memo arrived in his inbox. He opened it quickly, expecting a list of consultants or instructions to prepare documents. Instead, the message was short and direct. Your case has been assigned to the strategic review team. Neo let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. The strategic review team was known for handling the hardest cases. This meant Amina Global was taking him seriously. But when he scrolled down to see the names of the experts on the team, his eyes stopped suddenly. There, written clearly under the assignment list, was a name he had not seen in months. Amina. His heart stopped for a second. He rubbed his eyes and looked again, thinking he misread it, but the name remained. The same daughter he forced out of his home. The same girl he believed would never make anything of herself. The same person he erased from his life with a signature. He stared at the memo, unable to move. It felt like time had paused around him. He tried to convince himself it must be a different Amina, but deep down he knew the truth. The name, the department, the company, it was her. His Amina. The girl he thought was weak. The girl he thought didn't matter. The girl he insulted, ignored, and replaced with greed. Now her name was printed on the document that held the fate of his entire business. Neo leaned back in his chair, his breath uneven. His mind raced through old memories, her soft voice asking him to look at her school projects, her hopeful smile on her birthdays, her quiet attempts to make him proud. He had pushed all of that away. And now life had brought her right back in front of him, not as his daughter, but as the expert assigned to judge his company. It felt like a punishment he never expected. For several long minutes, he just sat there, staring at the screen, frozen. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as reality sank in. The person he had thrown out was now the one standing between him and the survival of everything he owned. Neo walked into the sleek conference room, trying to hold his composure. He had rehearsed every word he would say, every confident gesture he would make, believing he was still in control. Investors and executives from his company sat around the polished table, some looking concerned, others skeptical. He told himself that once the meeting began, he would charm them, impress them, and secure the deal that could save everything. He didn't notice how tense his hands were, gripping the edges of his briefcase. Madame Isok entered the room, calm and authoritative, commanding attention without saying a word. She looked at the papers in front of her, then at Neo, then at the team gathered. We have a specialist who understands your project better than your own team, she announced, her voice steady. Neo's chest swelled with pride. He smiled slightly, expecting a powerful consultant to step forward, someone with years of experience and authority. He imagined a man in a tailored suit, someone who would impress the investors and make him look smart. Instead, the figure stepping forward was a woman, young, poised, and calm. Neo's smile faltered, but he still didn't recognize her yet. The CEO stepped aside and said clearly, Amina will lead this review. Neo froze, his face drained of color. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. The name echoed in his mind, Amina. His daughter. The girl he had thrown out, the one he believed would never amount to anything. She was the one leading the review, the one now holding the fate of his company in her hands. The investors shifted in their seats, whispering, impressed by her calm entrance. Amina walked confidently to the front, papers in hand, her eyes focused, her presence commanding respect. Neo could barely breathe. He opened his mouth, wanting to speak, to assert control, to remind her who she was, to tell the CEO she was not qualified. But the words got stuck. Every glance she cast, every note she referenced, every insight she shared about the project exposed the mistakes he had ignored for months. He realized quickly that she wasn't just competent, she was exceptional. Everything he had built on lies, half-calculations, and ego was now under her scrutiny. He looked around the table at the investors, their attention fully on Amina. They were taking notes, nodding, asking questions, impressed by her knowledge. And Neo, who had once been proud of controlling everything, sat frozen powerless. The daughter he had disowned was now the authority in the room, the person everyone respected. The reality hit him hard. He had underestimated her, dismissed her, and the consequences were unfolding in front of him, faster than he could ever stop. Amina stepped into the room with her head held high, her heart steady despite the tension thick in the air. Every eye turned toward her as she approached the table, calm and collected. She carried her notes, but more than that, she carried the weight of her experiences, the months of struggle, the betrayals, and the lessons she had learned. She wasn't here to fight her father or prove him wrong out of anger. She was here to show the truth, to speak with clarity and strength. She began systematically, pointing out every critical flaw Neo's team had ignored for months. The numbers didn't add up. Projections were overly optimistic. Risks were miscalculated. She explained the potential consequences in simple terms, breaking down complex data so everyone could understand the gravity of the mistakes. She didn't raise her voice, didn't show bitterness, and didn't dwell on the past. She spoke with precision, letting facts speak louder than emotions. Board members leaned in, nodding as they followed her points. Investors scribbled notes furiously, eyes widening at the insights she uncovered. What they were hearing was not a simple review. It was a revelation. The gaps, oversights, and mismanagement Neo had tried to ignore were now visible in full light, all explained by someone he had thought was incapable, someone he had tried to erase from his life. Neo sat frozen, his mouth slightly open, trying to find words. Amina, I didn't know, he whispered, almost as if admitting it out loud could change anything. She looked at him calmly and interrupted gently, not with anger, but with quiet truth. You didn't want to know, she said softly. Her words weren't cruel. They were simply the reality of the choices he had made. He had chosen greed over care, selfishness over family, and now he had to face the consequences. Without missing a beat, Amina continued her presentation. She moved to the next chart, pointing out risks and solutions, showing how to correct the course without hesitation. The investors were captivated, asking questions, seeking her advice. Her voice never wavered. She commanded respect not through force, but through knowledge, composure, and undeniable competence. Every point she made reminded the room that she was not just capable. She was brilliant, strategic, and in control. Neo's face turned pale with realization. The daughter he had dismissed and disowned was now the authority in the room. She had no need to yell, no need to gloat, no need to show anger. Her strength was in her focus, her intellect, and the quiet confidence that came from surviving hardships he could never understand. By the end of the presentation, the investors nodded, the board members murmured in agreement, and Neo sat back, defeated not by malice, but by truth. Amina's calm power filled the room, and everyone understood one thing clearly. She was unstoppable, and she had arrived on her own terms. Amina's rise at Amajani Global was steady and well-earned. Within months, she earned a promotion to regional analyst, a position that came with responsibility, respect, and the recognition she had always deserved. Her days were filled with meaningful work, making real decisions that affected projects and teams. For the first time in her life, her efforts were acknowledged, her ideas valued, and her presence welcomed, not because she was related to anyone, but because of the person she had become. Meanwhile, Neo's world continued to unravel. The massive deal he had counted on to save his empire collapsed completely. It wasn't because Amina had tried to sabotage him. She had acted with integrity and professionalism. The errors, miscalculations, and poor planning he had ignored for so long finally caught up with him. Investors pulled out, partners doubted him, and the reputation he had built over decades crumbled like sand slipping through fingers. One afternoon, Neo called Amina, his voice shaky, hoping to manipulate, to charm, or maybe to plead. He wanted her to fix what he had failed to maintain. She didn't even pause to look at him. Walking past him in the office hallway, she said only, "I'm not here to fix what you broke." Her words were calm, firm, and final. She had no obligation to rescue him or his failing empire. She had her own life to build, her own success to enjoy. Amina didn't announce her triumphs or make speeches. She didn't post selfies or flaunt her promotions. Instead, she returned to her aunt's apartment carrying groceries, enjoying the simplicity of her life, the small victories, and the sense of freedom she had never known before. Every step she took was proof that she no longer needed permission, approval, or validation from the father who once cast her aside. Her life was her own. She invested in herself, her skills, and her future, creating a path that depended only on her abilities and determination. People around her respected her, admired her, and learned from her example. She became a figure of quiet strength, someone who could rise above betrayal without losing dignity. Neo, who had once believed she was weak, watched from afar as she flourished. The daughter he had disowned had become everything he claimed she could never be: intelligent, independent, respected, and unstoppable. She had not only survived his rejection, but had turned it into the foundation of her success. Amina's life was proof that when you refuse to let someone else define your worth, you can achieve more than they ever imagined. And you can do it on your own terms.